Welcome back to the Rundown Lab, where we break down and fact check the biggest health podcasts. We know your time is valuable, but when you can, we always recommend catching the full episode. Links are in the description. Buying a house is a waste of money by the Diary of a CEO. Here's something that might surprise you. The tax benefit that supposedly makes homeownership such a great deal? Most Americans don't actually receive it anymore, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. Today, we're fact-checking an episode from the Diary of a CEO that tackles one of the biggest financial decisions most of us will ever make, whether buying a house is actually worth it. The discussion touches on stock market returns, tax advantages of homeownership, and where ordinary Americans actually build their wealth. These are important topics, and getting them right matters. So let's dig in and see what holds up. What they got right. Credit where it's due. The episode nails some fundamental points about wealth building. First, on stock market returns. The claim that the stock market has averaged over 10% annually over the last 20 years is mostly accurate. The S&P 500 has indeed returned roughly 9.5 to 10.5% annually over most recent 20-year periods, when you include dividends. The exact number shifts depending on which specific years you're measuring, but the ballpark figure is solid. Second, the episode correctly states that married couples can exclude over $500,000 in capital gains when selling their home. This refers to IRS Section 121, which allows married couples filing jointly to exclude up to $500,000 in gains from taxes. That's a significant benefit, and it's accurately described. Third, when the episode discusses where average Americans hold their wealth, pointing to home equity in the stock market, this aligns well with Federal Reserve data. The Survey of Consumer Finances consistently shows that for middle-class households, their primary residence is typically their largest asset, followed by retirement accounts that are largely invested in stocks. These are meaningful points that help frame the homeownership debate, and they're presented correctly. Where it gets complicated. Now here's where some important context gets lost. That 10% stock market return figure? It's a nominal return, meaning it doesn't account for inflation. When you adjust for the rising cost of living, actual purchasing power gains are closer to 7% annually. That's still excellent, but it's a meaningful difference when you're projecting decades into the future. Also worth noting, past performance doesn't guarantee future results. Financial advisors are required to say this for good reason. On the capital gains exclusion for single homeowners, the episode mentions you get $250,000 in tax benefits if you own a home for over 2 years. The core concept is right, but the requirements are more specific than presented. You must have owned and lived in the home as your primary residence for at least 2 of the last 5 years before selling. It's an exclusion, not a rebate, which means you only benefit if you actually have gains to exclude. And you can only use this benefit once every 2 years. These details matter significantly for anyone actually planning their finances around this provision. But here's the biggest oversimplification. The claim that you get tax deductions on mortgages. This used to be true for most homeowners, but the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act changed everything. Mortgage interest is only deductible if you itemize your deductions. Since that tax reform nearly doubled the standard deduction, the vast majority of taxpayers now benefit more from taking the standard deduction than from itemizing. The deduction is also limited to interest on the first $750,000 of mortgage debt. What does this mean practically? A huge portion of homeowners receive zero tax benefit from their mortgage interest. Presenting this as a universal advantage of homeownership is genuinely misleading for anyone making financial decisions today. One more nuance on wealth distribution. While it's true that home equity and stock investments represent major wealth sources for Americans, this pattern is strongest for middle-class households. Lower-income Americans often have minimal wealth in either category, while the wealthy hold a much larger share in financial assets beyond their home. Also, when we talk about stock market wealth for most Americans, we're really talking about 401ks and IRAs, not individual brokerage accounts. Red flags. I'm pleased to report there weren't any outright false claims in this episode. The information presented is generally grounded in reality, even where it lacks nuance. This is a relatively responsible discussion of a complex topic. The bottom line. So what's the verdict? This episode from the Diary of a CEO presents generally accurate information about personal finance fundamentals, but with some important caveats. The broad concepts about capital gains exclusions, mortgage deductions, and wealth distribution are correct in principle. The key issue is that several claims omit qualifying details that significantly affect real-world applicability. Most notably, the mortgage interest deduction is far less valuable than implied since the 2017 tax changes. Anyone making major financial decisions based on this episode should dig deeper into the specifics of their own situation. Your 3 takeaways. First, stock market returns of around 10% are historically accurate, but don't account for inflation. Second, home sale tax exclusions exist, but have specific residency requirements. And third, mortgage interest deductions benefit far fewer homeowners than they used to. As always, verify financial advice against your personal circumstances and consult qualified professionals for major decisions.